understand that I'm between you and your lunch, and I will try to be as brief as possible. However, earlier this morning, I was witness of a very important pact, memorandum of cooperation related to blockchain between Taiwan and Dubai. And this brings in my mind two things. First, that blockchain brings different parts of the world together. And second, that blockchain is not a pariah technology of some illegal guys who try to buy drugs, but it's a mainstream and very important technology trying to elevate the standards of the people. The title of my presentation is How to Make Blockchain Mainstream. And this is one of my visions in the last 2 years in the European Parliament. Let me first start with a brief story. Why the European Parliament decided to make a resolution on blockchain. You might know the Greek financial crisis. At some point, the Minister of Finance of Greece threatened the European Central Bank that if they will cut the euro provision to Greece, he will transform the bank accounts of Greeks to Bitcoin. So we filed a question to Mario Draghi, the head of European Central Bank, and in his reply, a 3-page reply, he said that Bitcoin does not exist. Blockchain is completely out of the agenda. It's better to forget it. But we understood that something important is behind it, because if bankers do not like something, it might be of value for the people. So we tried to understand what kind of value we can find in blockchain. And we try, as we are not very talented people, to put everything into boxes in order to manage the complexity better. And we understand that the value of blockchain comes from its promise to provide efficient disintermediation, value through efficient disintermediation. And here we understand that every source of value should by necessity have a microeconomic, a macroeconomic, and a political economy dimension. This is the framework that introduces us to a concept that I would like to define as disintermediation economics. In terms of analytical economics, disintermediation can provide value through the reduction of the transaction costs and creation of efficient economies of scale and economies of scope. Also, digitization of the process of delegated monitoring through limitation of informational asymmetries such as adverse selection, moral hazard, agency frictions, and ex-ante contract management. And third, limitation of operational frictions through the increase of liquidity. In terms of microeconomic dimension of disintermediation economics, we identify 4 sources of value. First, about lowering operational costs. Second, about lowering entry barriers for small firms into capital-intensive markets. About the identification of niche market opportunities, and the automation of transaction and verification mechanisms through smart contracts. On the macroeconomic and financial dimension, we identify also 4 basic sources of value. Increase of the total factor productivity through the efficient rearrangement of the production function, compatible with the 4th Industrial Revolution growth prospects. Streamlining of financial markets and tokenization of increasing liquidity. ICOs, which is a source of mobilization of idle capital to higher-risk technology-intensive innovations, and the facilitation of technology transfer. And finally, an opportunity to revisit the monopoly of central banks to create money. There is also a political economy implication here. We know in the course of the history that every human institution requires 2 ingredients, trust and identity. It's time for us to start thinking what is the future of institutions in the era where code is the source of identity, the source of trust, and identities related to our digital fingerprint. And here, we go a step forward and we try to identify what kind of balances we should introduce in order to make this intermediation possible. And this involves three questions. How fast we should provide this source of change, to how much detail we should go in regulatory terms, and how wide our regulatory scope should be. This is the famous S-curve. This is how we understand innovation. At the beginning, it's very low. It scales up at some point until it reaches a peak. This is a microeconomic identification of how a technology can spread. But let me introduce a more sociological one. How many of you know Marx? You know Marx? Well, Marx and Hegel introduced the concept of social engineering, and in 1988, a very famous American professor, Francis Fukuyama, introduced the concept of the last man, the liberal man. He started with a Marxian and Hegelian view of social engineering and transformation, and he said in 1988 that we reached the end of history. It's the moment that the homo, as we know it, the human, cannot be improved in terms of trust with further social engineering. Well, blockchain comes to challenge this end of history concept because it reinvents the concept of trust. How fast we are going to adopt this kind of technology which challenges our traditional understanding of trust? We have frictions relating to the sources of trust among countries and among societies, and we also have economic frictions coming through variations of capitalism, because not always capitalism is the same. So we have societies on the one extreme, the red one, with strong intervention of the state, and the trust is primarily coming from the family ties. And we also have more liberal societies with strong market tradition, where the trust comes from communal society. Having this economic and sociological concept in mind, when I opened the Word document and I found the white paper in front of me, I had to build on some basic principles, regulatory principles on how to approach the beast. The three principles here we introduced in the European Parliament in order to build our blockchain resolution, which is a reference point worldwide right now, as the Congress has copy-pasted our text in the United States. The first principle is the innovation principle. We cannot over-regulate a technology which is still evolving and with uncertain impact. Having this in mind, we decided not to introduce a regulation per se. We rather adopted the principle of technology neutrality. If we can deliver a service in a certain technology and also deliver it with blockchain technology, then the regulators should be neutral, not to favor one technology over the other. The other dimension is about the business model neutrality. This is also a very sensitive aspect because at this point, the regulator should not intervene in order to favor a certain business model over another. We wanted to make sure that the European Parliament members would understand blockchain well beyond Bitcoin and ICOs. So we identified a wide range of alternative sectors that could be affected by the tokenization of value. So we provided technical recommendations on energy sector, healthcare, supply chains, education, transportation, creative industries and copyrights, and of course financial institutions. Building a healthy blockchain ecosystem, of course, has its own challenge. The blockchain resolution of the European Parliament identifies 5 sources of challenge. First is about the data protection. We have introduced the GDPR, which is a very good regulation to protect privacy, and one of the promises of blockchain is to give data back to the people. The other dimension is about the potential of smart contracts. Smart contracts is a well-developed item in information technology, but when we are coming to speak about the legal impact of smart contracts, we need to identify a wide range of alternatives here. And we are talking about European Union, where even the digital signature is not regulatory confirmed by all the member states. There are also operational challenges that every state should identify, like the interoperability of the blockchains, or the interoperability between the blockchains and the legacy systems. Standardization, and also, based on standardization, the scalability of the technology. Another problem is related to cybersecurity. Encryption is very essential in blockchain, but what is the future of blockchain in an era of quantum computing? Finally, we identified the potential of ICOs as a facilitation of technology transfer and mobilization of idle capital. A very important innovation in our blockchain resolution is that we made a reference on ICOs as a distinct asset class, trying to avoid the categorization between utility tokens and security tokens. We also identified the potential of public sector transformation. Public sector would be instrumental in the development of blockchain opportunities and transfer of these technologies to the member states. We identified applications for the streamlining of traditional public services like land registry, certificates, and licenses. We also developed a very important project related to tax evasion. We developed concepts related to the application of the streamlining of cross-border transactions between the member states, regulatory reporting, data transactions between European citizens through smart contracts, and so on. We also made the case of a crypto euro. Of course, the European Central Bank does not want to discuss about it, but it's a matter of time to understand the necessities and move forward. In order to reassure that blockchain is going to have a full potential all over the world, European Union is dedicated to take the leadership in this technology and welcome everybody from all over the world to work together. So we developed INATBA, which is the acronym of International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications. INATBA is focusing on 4 basic premises. The first is the constructive dialogue. Our aim is to maintain a permanent and constructive dialogue with public authorities and regulators that will contribute to the convergence of regulatory approaches to blockchain and other distributed ledger technologies globally. The second is about governance model. Our aim is to promote an open, transparent, and inclusive global model of governance for blockchain and other distributed ledger technology infrastructures that reflect the shared interest of the stakeholders from industry, startups and SMEs, civil society, organizations, governments, and international organizations. Another aspect is about the development support. Support the development and adoption of interoperability guidelines, specifications, and global standards to enhance trusted, traceable, user-centric digital services. And finally, DLT applications, which is about the development of sector-specific guidelines and specifications for the development of acceleration of trusted sectorial blockchain and DLT applications in specific sectors. Do you recognize the statute? This is David in Florence, made by Michelangelo. Michelangelo wanted somehow to depict and provide a view of how is the human in the era of Renaissance, the age where we invented the concept of book, of printing, the new interesting mechanical and Newtonian physics. We entered in 14th and 15th century in a new world, and David was the icon of the transition from the old medieval man to the Renaissance period. You see in his eyes how a human responds to a Renaissance, a brand new world that tries to find himself. Well, if you see the statue, you see that David encountered Goliath, but it's not the moment that he drops the stone to Goliath. It's the moment that he realized what to do. He made the first step. He decided to act, but he is not certain about the outcome that is going to come. This is more or less where we are right now as citizens in the era of Fourth Industrial Revolution, which might be a second Renaissance. This is more or less what we are doing as a government in the European Union. We have understood that world changes. We have made the first step. We have decided to act. And we are uncertain about what we are going to do. Hopefully, what we are going to do is going to be for the benefit of the entire world. Thank you.